Community-based rehabilitation aims to enhance the quality of life for people with disabilities and ensure their inclusion and participation in various social activities while addressing the vicious cycle of poverty. It is implemented through the combined efforts of PWDs, families, communities, government, and NGOs. In line with this, the UST College of Rehabilitation Sciences aims to develop a multidisciplinary rehabilitation program to address the needs of Abukay Bataan. This would involve determining several factors and strategies that would affect and improve the compliance of patients. This study is divided into three phases. The first establishes psychometric properties of Filipino versions of two questionnaires. The second determines the association of enjoyment and well-being with compliance of patients. And the third determines the effect of participation in activities with level of enjoyment and well-being.
In Phase 1, the first objective is to establish the psychometric properties of Filipino version of physical activity enjoyment scale, and the three aspects for the study design is data, which is analytic, objective, observational, and the method is quantitative. The psychometric studies or diagnostic validity is the most appropriate study design for this research because the researchers aim to see if the physical enjoyment scale is valid and reliable in screening the compliance in community-based rehabilitation programs. For the participants in the setting, random sampling was used to get 50 adult patients from the community-based rehabilitation program in Abukay, Bataan. The translated questionnaire was validated by 6 experts for content validity and then re-administered to patients 2 times with a 2-week interval for retest reliability. For data analysis, for content validity, data was analyzed by computing for the content validity index for each item, and for the scale, using MS Excel, a bar graph was used to plot the data. For retest reliability, alpha was set to 0.05 and the dependent t-test was used to analyze the data gathered. For the results for this objective, the graph shows the item content validity of each item in the questionnaire of the Filipino version of the physical activity enjoyment scale. All of the items are considered valid as the values of the item content validity index are greater than or equal to 0.78 for raters more than or equal to 6. The items with the lowest ICVI of 0.78 was Q5. Meanwhile, Q12 obtained the highest ICVI of 0.84, thus each item is appropriate in measuring the enjoyment scale while doing physical activities of the Filipino adults. However, a value of 0.81 was obtained for the content validity index for scales of the questionnaire, making it invalid, since the accepted value for SCVI is greater than or equal to 0.90. And lastly, for this table, it actually shows the retest reliability of the Filipino version of the physical activity enjoyment scale after 2 trials with 2-week interval using dependent t-test. Since the obtained p-values from conducting a dependent t-test comparing both trials are 0.01 with an alpha of 0.05 in all categories. With this, we can conclude that there is a significant change or inconsistency between the values of the 2 trials, thus making the test unreliable.
The second objective of Phase 1 is to establish the psychometric properties of the Filipino version of Adult Well-Being Scale. The results are as follows. The graph shows the content validity of each item in the questionnaire of the Filipino version of the Adult Well-Being Scale. All of the items are considered valid as the values of the Content Validity Index or CVI are greater than 0.78. The items with the lowest CVI of 0.79 were questions 6 and 13. Meanwhile, question 12 obtained the highest CVI of 0.84. This means that each item is comprehensive and appropriate to measure the well-being of Filipino adults. The table shows the retest reliability of the Filipino version of the Adult Wellbeing Scale after 2 trials with 2-week intervals using dependent t-test. Since the obtained p-values from conducting a dependent t-test comparing both trials are 0.01 with an alpha of 0.05 in all categories, we can conclude that there is a significant change between the values in the first trial and the second trial. Some factors may have affected the answers of the participants in both trials, such as the time of conducting the second trial. This concludes that the test is not reliable.
Methodology Phase 2 Study Design Analytic Observational Cross-Sectional Study. Participants 100 adults from the CBR program in Abukay, Bataan. Data gathering methods use the Filipino version of Physical Activity Enjoyment Scale and Well-Being Scale. Data analysis for the association of enjoyment alpha was set to 0.05, Spearman's test was used, and linear graph was used to plot the data. For association of perceived well-being, alpha was set to 0.05, Spearman's test was also used, and a bar graph was used to plot the data.
There is an inverse relationship between the patient's compliance and their enjoyment. As the patient's compliance to the therapy increases, his enjoyment decreases. However, because the correlation coefficient is far from 1, which is negative 0.78, there is not much strength between the association of the compliance and enjoyment of the patient.
In comparing well-being scores of compliant and non-compliant patients, the bar graph shows that non-compliant are more affected by depression, anxiety, outward and inward irritability. In terms of compliance in a community-based rehabilitation program, anxiety ranked as the highest factor in both patients. Based on the correlation coefficients, depression, anxiety, outward and inward irritability all show to have an inverse relationship with compliance, meaning the lower well-being score of the patient, the greater the non-compliance of the patient.
Good day, and here's the objective 5 for our Resmeth findings from 3SPS. So our general objective is determine factors affecting the compliance of patients in community-based rehabilitation program and strategies to improve care. Then, our specific objective is to determine the effects of participation in social and sports activities with level of enjoyment. So, random sampling was used. There are 2 groups, intervention and control, from 1 SLP and 1 SBS. Here are the baseline PACES scores, intervention group, control group, and p-value. The p-value is 0.77. So, in short, it is not significant enough, so there's no relationship. So 2 weeks later, here are the results. So the p-value became low. So we can therefore conclude that there is a relationship. So in conclusion, there is a relationship between the participating of social and sports activities and the level of enjoyment.
study design was utilized to determine the effects of participation in social and sports activities with perceived well-being in terms of depression, anxiety, outward irritability, and inward irritability. Through random sampling, 50 patients were selected and randomized into two groups: an intervention group with social and sports activities, and a control group with standard intervention. The perceived well-being of patients obtained at baseline were compared with the results obtained 2 weeks after the intervention administration. Comparison of results from pre- and post-intervention in both experimental and controlled groups are as follows. Depression. Comparing the baseline scores of both intervention and controlled groups with depression, it was observed that the control group scores are higher as compared to the intervention group. Comparing the post-intervention results of controlled and intervention group, the control group's results seem to have worsened while those in the intervention group improved. For this test, the alpha was set at 0.05. Comparing with the p-value of pre-intervention, which is 0.77, it can be concluded that there was no difference between the two groups since the p-value is higher. Post-intervention, it is seen that the p-value, which is 0.02, is lower than the alpha that connotes a difference between the two groups. Anxiety. In terms of anxiety, it was observed that the control group scores are higher as compared to the intervention group. The control group results seem to have worsened while those in the intervention group improved, as evidenced by the significant increase in the post-intervention score. For this test, the alpha was set at 0.05 comparing with the p-value of pre-intervention, which is 0.70. It can be concluded that there was no difference between the two groups since the p-value was higher. Post-intervention, it is seen that the p-value, which is 0.03, is lower than the alpha that connotes a difference between the two groups. Outward irritability. With regard to the outward irritability of patients, the control group scores are lower than that of the intervention group. However, comparing the post-intervention results of the control and the intervention group, the intervention group's results seem to have significantly improved, while those in the control group worsened. For this test, the alpha was set at 0.05, comparing with the p-value of pre-intervention, which is 0.67. It can be concluded that there was no difference between the two groups since the p-value is higher. Post-intervention, it is seen that the p-value, which is 0.04, is lower than the alpha that connotes a difference between the two groups. Inward irritability. Lastly, comparing the baseline scores of both intervention and control groups with inward irritability, it was observed that the control group scores are lower than that of the intervention. However, comparing the post-intervention results of the control and intervention group, the intervention group's results seem to have significantly improved, while those in the control group worsened. For this test, the alpha was set at 0.05, comparing with the p-value of pre-intervention, which is 0.89. It can be concluded that there was no difference between the two groups since the p-value was higher. Post-intervention, it is seen that the p-value, which is 0.03, is lower than the alpha that connotes a difference between the two groups. In conclusion, the group with patients who were involved in social and sport activities exhibited better performance 2 weeks after the administration of intervention, as seen in significant or marked differences in scores at the baseline and post-intervention.
Created using Powtoon.
In conclusion, the items in the questionnaires used for the study were acceptable in measuring the enjoyment scale and perceived well-being of the participants, but different factors such as time and circumstances may have affected the results in both trials, which made the translated questionnaire unreliable. There are several factors which can affect the compliance of the patients with the community rehabilitation program. This includes the enjoyment and perceived well-being. Those who have not attended frequent therapy sessions enjoyed more than those who did. Factors that also lead to lower well-being score, such as depression, anxiety, outward irritability, and inward irritability, may affect the compliance of the patient. Patients who also participate in social and sports activities show positive improvement in terms of enjoyment scale and overall well-being. For the implication, the study shows that the CBR program should be a multidisciplinary approach focusing not only on individual aspects but on a holistic approach considering the enjoyment, well-being, and involvement of the patient in recreational activities. To make the research more effective in assessing the compliance of the patients, the questionnaires used should be revised to qualify for the validity and reliability test. This requires further researches in the future. As rehab practitioners, CBR is an integral part of our involvement in the community. As such, we should use a holistic approach rather than rehabilitating one aspect to ensure optimal development of our patient as well as the community.